Where we left off, Ralph had just run through the maze, but tried to jump on top of it to get to the peanut butter. That's not what Ryan wanted him to do. So he's feeling a little bit discouraged and thinking about what life is like back at the hotel. Sometime late Sunday night, the weather changed. Snow began to melt. By Monday morning, the fleet of school buses came sloshing through slush. Boots and waffle stompers tracked mud and icy water into the halls of Irwin J. Sneed Elementary School, where the wearers were met by Mr. Costa holding a large mop. Ralph, whose weekend had been so long and so lonely, felt such a surge of joy and relief at the sound of school buses that he skittered to room 5 in a forgiving mood. There he hid in the old mitten. Anything was better than that long, cold, miserable weekend, and perhaps Ryan had found a way of repairing the motorcycle. Miss Kay's class arrived in a grouchy mood. Snow was fun. Slush was not. There was more confusion than usual as the children peeled off their wraps and kicked off their boots. Many were carrying clippings from the Cucaracha Voice. Miss Kay was not in the room to welcome them, which did not help. Gordon told Melissa, who was wearing wet shoes and carrying her boots, that he was sure static electricity would not hold a mouse to a sock. Melissa told Gordon he had no imagination. Brad arrived with his arm in a sling. Instantly, a rumor started that Brad had hit Ryan so hard he had injured his hand. Sides were taken. Arguments began. Ryan glared at Brad. "You owe me a motorcycle for the one you broke. Served you right if you hurt your hand." "That motorcycle you said was Ralph's," scoffed Brad. "What would that stupid mouse do with a motorcycle?" Someone dropped a clipping, and before it was picked up, Ralph was able to glimpse a picture of himself looking small and frightened in the goldfish bowl. The picture was not bad. In fact, it was quite good. His eyes were bright, and each hair was distinct. Ralph congratulated himself on being such a handsome mouse, and wondered if Matt, back at the inn, if he still worked there, would see the picture, recognize, and perhaps miss him. As the last bell rang, Miss Kay hurried into the room with a worried look on her face. Instantly, she was surrounded by excited children, waving clippings from the Cucaracha Voice and trying to talk at once. "It wasn't like that at all," they said. "That reporter got it all wrong. It's a bunch of lies. They didn't even put our picture in the paper." Most puzzling was, "Ralph isn't that kind of mouse. He's nice." "They're behaving like a bunch of little mice," thought Ralph. At the same time, he wondered uneasily what the paper had said about him. That he wasn't nice? Impossible. Miss Kay stood without speaking at the front of the room. Gradually, the class grew quiet. "That's better," said Miss Kay. Amazing, thought Ralph. The teacher had silenced the class without using a single bad word. He was even more ashamed of the way he had treated his little relatives. After the class recited liberty and justice for all, but not for me, thought Ralph, Miss Kay said, "Class, we have a lot to talk about this morning, and we can't talk if we all speak at once. Brad, suppose you begin by telling us what happened to your arm." Brad looked embarrassed. "I just sprained it when I tried to ride my bike in the mud. I was trying to get ready for the first motocross race this spring." The class respected what Brad had tried to do, and Ralph was struck by a sudden thought. Brad was exactly the sort of boy who could understand a mouse who rode a motorcycle. To change the subject, Brad asked, "Is Ralph going to try to run the maze again?" "How about it, Ryan?" asked Miss Kay. "Did you bring Ralph to school today?" "He's lost." Ralph sounded worried. "He got mad he got mad Friday afternoon and disappeared." "I am not lost," Ralph said to himself. "I know where I am, right here in this mitten." A sigh of disappointment ran through room 5. The class liked Ralph. Besides, watching a mouse in a maze was more fun than social studies or spelling. "Miss Kay," said Gordon, "even if Ryan finds Ralph, I don't think he should have to run the maze again. He proved there was a better way to get the peanut butter than running into dead ends." "Why, he's right," thought Ralph, perked up by Gordon's support. "I'm smarter than I thought I was." "Class, do you agree?" asked Miss Kay, who liked her pupils to think. The class thought. Brad was first to speak. "In motocross racing, it's against the rules to get off your bike. I think he cheated." Several people were quick to point out that testing intelligence with the maze was not the same thing as racing on a bicycle, even a BMX. "Maybe he was too amazed to do it right," suggested Melissa with a giggle. Well, I think he proved he was gifted and talented, Gloria spoke as if she had ended the discussion by using words the school used to describe children, such as herself. Asked for a show of hands. 21 children agreed that Ralph had found a better way to run the maze. 5 felt he cheated. Case settled. Ralph was an unusually smart mouse, something he had doubted only once in a while. Speaking of solving problems, said Miss K, do you think fighting is a good way to settle arguments? No, chorused the girls. Ryan defended himself. Brad pushed me first. Besides, it wasn't a fair fight because I had Ralph in my pocket and didn't want him to get hurt. What do you have to say, Brad? Miss K asked. He made me mad, always bragging about how smart his mouse is and then trying to make the maze easy. Brad slid down in his chair. Anyhow, how was I supposed to know he had his old mouse in his pocket? Ryan muttered to Brad, just because you get to come to school in a tow truck, you think you're so big. Just because you get to live in a hotel, you think you're better than anybody, mumbled Brad. These remarks were lost to the class because the girls, bored with the scuffle discussion, were waving their clippings from the Cucaracha Voice. Miss K, said Gloria, I think that reporter was unfair. What she said about us was all wrong. Some members of the class, protesting that their families did not subscribe to the Voice, demanded to know what the article said. Miss K read the headline aloud. Class nabbed Sneed Invader. What's she talking about? Wondered Ralph, moving from the mitten to Melissa's overturned boot for a better view. What invader? Miss K continued. Under Ralph's picture, the story reads, Friday afternoon, the 5th grade class of Miss Bambi Kuchenbacher at Irwin J. Sneed Elementary School exhibited a mouse, thought to be one of many mice overrunning their school. They also discussed the harm rodents do to crops and food supplies and the rapidity with which they multiply. There was a murmur of disapproval from the class as Miss K read on. When informed of the mouse plague at the monthly meeting of the school board Friday evening, Superintendent Clyde B. Crossman promised a full investigation of conditions at Sneed. The class sat in outraged silence. Ralph was aghast. One tiny mouse, an invader overrunning the whole school all by himself? Suddenly, everyone had something to say. Our exhibit wasn't like that at all. We were having fun, and she made our school sound terrible. Poor little Ralph didn't invade us. Ryan brought him to school. She made our school sound dirty, and Mr. Costa works hard. She was mean not to put our picture in the paper. She stayed about 2 minutes and didn't understand what we were doing. Gordon felt he was to blame for the story. I didn't mean to get Ralph investigated, he said. I just wrote facts I found in library books. I didn't mean that Ralph personally ran around harming crops. Just how am I going to be investigated? Ralph was beginning to wonder. Brad was pleased that someone else was in the wrong. I think that reporter is a rat fink, was his contribution to the discussion. Miss K asked if he couldn't find a better way of expressing himself. After a moment, he said, I think that reporter just said what she wanted to say and didn't care about us. One boy said, my father says bad news sells more paper than good news. Everyone agreed that the reporters saying bad things about their school in order to sell more copies of the Cucaracha Voice was mean, unfair, and just plain sneaky. They did good things at their school, and she should have said so. Melissa said, I think we should all write letters to the paper and say the story wasn't true and that there is, or was, only one mouse here. A splendid idea, Melissa, said Miss K, always eager for a new project. We can write letters for our language arts class. However, I think we should be careful that we tell the truth. Of course, Room 5 would tell the truth. Room 5 always told the truth, except when they fibbed a little. Miss K continued, can we be sure that Ralph was the only mouse in school? Our principal told me that this morning, after reading the article in last night's Voice, the cafeteria workers reported a hole in a bag of sugar and tail tracings in the spilled sugar. The 4th grade teacher reported that seeds had disappeared from the mosaics her class had made. The librarian said the shredded material from the bags that books are mailed in has been scattered on the carpet. And the 1st grade teacher said she found tooth marks in a jar of paste. This information silenced the class, but left Ralph burdened with guilt. He was just a little mouse trying to get along in the world. He had not meant to cause so much trouble. Melissa spoke out, maybe if there are other mice and we can catch Ralph again, we could find him a girlfriend and have a mouse wedding. Oh, yes, said the girl, sighing. The boys were impolite about the suggestion. So was Ralph. "We don't know where Ralph is," was Miss K's comment, "and perhaps we should wait to write our letters until after the investigation. After all, there may be more mice in the school." The new class, who had been planning the angry letters they would write to the newspaper, had to agree. "But Miss K," said Gloria, "isn't her name Heidi?" Miss K laughed. "Yes, it is." "Then how come the reporter called you Bambi?" asked Gloria. "She must have confused her book characters," was Miss K's amused answer. Ralph saw nothing to be amused about. What would the investigation mean? Cats? An exterminator with traps and poisons? Fumigation with deadly fumes seeping through the halls? That new electronic mouser that made a noise only mice could hear and then sent them screaming into the night? Ralph was sure of only one thing. He had to escape from Irwin J. Sneed Elementary School, and he had to escape soon. Ralph was tired of skulking about, hiding in mittens and boots, scrounging glue-flavored seeds from fourth-grade mosaics, and eating sugar, which he had overheard children say rotted teeth. He was nervous about the mouse hunt that was about to begin at Sneed Elementary School, all because he had innocently wanted to leave the inn to save an old man's job. Ralph felt he was being blamed for everything that went wrong and trying to be good but not worthwhile. Ralph left Melissa's boot because he did not want Ryan to find him. He slipped behind a row of textbooks on health in a bookcase under the window and sat there, pondering large problems such as the unfairness of life and the shortage of liberty and justice for all, well-meaning mice. Ralph longed to return to the inn, but he knew that even if he found a way to get there, he could never face the jeering little relatives. First, they would demand to know what happened to his motorcycle. Then they would tell him it served him right that it was broken because he had been so selfish. "But I've got to go someplace," Ralph decided. Perhaps he could move into a restaurant in Cucaracha. Now that the snow was melting, there was no longer any danger of being buried. However, his feet might freeze or he might drown in dirty slush. He was too angry with Ryan to ask for help. What Ralph needed was transportation other, of course, than feet. Ralph tried to make plans. If he could somehow get hold of the pieces of his motorcycle, and if he could manage to nip off a strand of Miss K's strong hair, perhaps he could tie his motorcycle together again. While Ralph sat brooding behind the books, he was not forgotten by Room 5, who found the problems of a mouse much more interesting than making sentences out of spelling words. Hands were raised and questions asked. "But Miss K, don't you think we should try to find Ralph? Somebody might step on him. Miss K, how are they going to investigate the school for mice? Miss K, will they poison Ralph?" Miss K laid down her chalk and gave up trying to teach. "Miss K," said Ryan, "I'm sure Ralph is the only mouse here. He could have done all those things by himself." Ryan's remark gave the class hope for Ralph. "I know what we could do," said Melissa. "We could get him to walk across a stamp pad so he would leave purple footprints. That way we could see if he went to the cafeteria and the library and all those places." Ralph groaned. "Purple feet!" That Melissa and her bright ideas. The class was quick to point out that the ink would soon wear off, that Ralph would have to keep running back to the stamp pad, which no mouse would do. Anyway, they would have to find him first. "Well, class," said Miss K, "I can see that we are not going to get any work done until we find out more about the superintendent's investigation. If you will promise to work quietly on your spelling sentences, I will go ask Mr. Tanner what he plans to do." The class promised. Of course, they would work quietly. Didn't they always work quietly when the teacher left the room? Ralph climbed to the top of a book to watch. As soon as Miss K left, Melissa, taking the precaution of leaving the door open, posted herself as a lookout. When the teacher was safely out of sight, everyone began to whisper at once. Wads of paper flew back and forth. Ryan pulled the broken motorcycle out of his pocket and said to Brad, "See what you did?" By standing on his hind legs on top of a book, Ralph was able to see the remains of his motorcycle. More than Miss K's hair was needed to repair that wreck. His motorcycle was broken in two pieces. The muffler dangled, the spring forks were bent, the handlebars twisted. Ralph felt sick looking at it, sick and angry. Brad scowled. "Why don't you buy him another? You're a rich kid." Why should he, thought Ralph. Brad was the one who broke it. "I'm not a rich kid." Ryan was astonished by Brad's remark. "Then how come you live in a hotel?" demanded Brad. "Because my mother works there," said Ryan. I eat in the kitchen with the maids and waitresses. Oh, obviously Brad had not known this. Where's your father? I don't know. Ryan was sensitive about this subject. Someplace, I guess. Psst, hissed Melissa and scooted back to her seat. Quiet as mice, thought Ralph, as heads bent over spelling words. Miss Kay was smiling as she walked to the front of the room. The class looked up, waiting for her answer.